The bar in Larkspur Junction was the kind of place men drifted into when they wanted to forget the things they'd done and the things they'd failed to do. Rain hissed outside. The tracks hummed with the memory of trains that had passed hours ago. Inside, lamplight turned smoke into a low yellow fog. Cards slapped the table at the back. A piano stood in the corner with one key missing, silent, as if it had seen enough. At the long, scarred bar, a handful of former soldiers nursed their drinks, wearing faded blue or gray coats cut down to vests, medals tucked under shirts like secrets they still showed each other when they were drunk enough. They spoke too loudly. Men who'd survived artillery always did. They needed everyone to know they'd been there. On the far end of the bar sat an old man drinking watered whiskey from a chipped glass. He wore a plain coat, no color to say who he'd fought for. His shoulders were narrow, not from frailty, but for being stripped down to essentials. His hair was white and thin. The knuckles visible around his glass were twisted by time, the skin thin and spotted, a faint tremor running through them. He looked like a man the West had already forgotten. The bartender slid another glass his way without asking. The old man nodded once, the kind of nod that said thank you and don't worry about talking to me in the same breath. At the round table near the stove, the soldiers laughed. One of them slapped his hand down hard enough to rattle the glasses. 43, he said, grinning. 43 confirmed. That's what the colonel wrote in the dispatch. 43 rebels put in the ground by these hands. He spread his fingers, enjoying the way the lamplight caught the calluses. The youngest of them snorted. He had a dark mustache he didn't quite have the face for and a swagger that didn't come from his boots. His name was Wyatt Briggs, and he liked the sound of it so much he said it whenever he could. 43, he said, rolling the number in his mouth. That all, Cole? Hell, I stopped counting after 60. The others hooted. Bragging about numbers was easier than talking about the screams. Wyatt's gaze drifted along the bar, looking for a new audience, someone who hadn't yet heard his stories. His eyes landed on the old man at the end. The old man kept his head down, staring into the swirl of whiskey and water like it might hold the answer to why he was still breathing. Wyatt smiled, slow and mean. Heard Larkspur's full of heroes, he said loudly. But all I see tonight is one tired bartender and a relic who looks like he dodged the war by hiding in the church cellar. Laughter rolled around the room. The bartender paused in his polishing, eyes sliding toward the old man. A couple of ranch hands at a side table went still. They knew how these things could go. War had ended, but some men were still looking for battles. The old man lifted his glass and took a long, careful sip. His hand shook just enough that a drop of whiskey slid down the side of his fingers. He did not turn around. Wyatt pushed his chair back, spurs scraping the floor like someone dragging teeth over bone. He rose and swaggered toward the bar, tapping 2 fingers against an imaginary drum cadence on his thigh. Hey, Grandpa, he said, coming up on the old man's left side. I'm talking to you. You go deaf along with that hair turning white. The old man's eyes stayed on his glass. His shoulders rose and fell with one slow breath. Leave him be, Wyatt, the bartender muttered. He's paid up, doesn't bother no one. That right. Wyatt leaned his elbow on the bar, dropping his voice just enough that everyone leaned in to hear anyway. Doesn't bother anyone by sitting there like a ghost while real men talk about real wars? That's bothering me, Tom. Feels like an insult to the boys who didn't come home. He reached out and flicked the old man's ear like he was testing if a statue was made of stone. The old man's jaw tightened, just for a moment, just enough to make the air change. Son, he said quietly. His voice was thin but even. Walk away. Wyatt laughed. It was a bright, careless sound, reckless in a way that only men who have not yet paid full price can manage. You hear that? He said to the room. Old man thinks he can give orders. You know who gives orders, Grandpa? Men who stood in line with cannonballs bouncing through their ranks. Men who watch friends turn to smoke. You don't have the look of someone who's seen that. The old man finally set his glass down. His hand was still. He turned his head a fraction, just enough that one pale I could see Wyatt. Up close, it was a washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky when the sun is hidden and cold eats straight through your coat. Last chance, the old man said. You don't want what comes next. Wyatt straightened, stung by the quiet. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that in front of an audience. "You threatening me?" he said, voice louder now. "You think your trembling hand is faster than someone who led charges across open fields? Do you know how many men I put under the dirt, old-timer?" He slapped his pistol for emphasis. "More than you've buried, sons," he said. The room went very still. That was the line. He'd crossed it without even feeling the edge. One of the older soldiers muttered a curse and pushed his chair an inch back from the table, just in case. The bartender's rag went still on the counter. The old man looked away from Wyatt and back at his glass, as if considering whether there was enough whiskey left for one more sip. Then his left hand eased off the bar and dropped to his side, fingertips brushing the worn leather of a holster that had been hidden under his coat. No one had noticed it until that moment. Wyatt saw it and grinned, relief flooding his face. A duel he understood. A gun he respected. "There we go," he said. "That's the spirit. Tell you what, I'll give you a sporting chance. On three." He took a deliberate step back, boots thudding. "Everyone watching?" he called. "Because it ain't every night you get to see history end." He spread his arms, drawing the attention of the whole room. The ranch hands, the old soldiers, the bartender. Even the man dozing by the stove opened one eye. "Count it with me," Wyatt said. "One." The old man's face emptied of expression. Lines that had seemed like age settled into something else. The map of a life drawn in hard strokes. "Two." He exhaled slowly. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, just enough to loosen whatever knot held him together. "THR." The bar exploded into sound. Wyatt's hand blurred for his pistol. The old man's hand moved first. Leather creaked. Metal hissed. Bang. Wyatt's gun stayed stuck half out of the holster. His shoulders snapped back as if yanked by an invisible hook. The force spun him sideways. His pistol skittered across the floor. A bottle behind the bar shattered from Wyatt's wild, reflexive shot as his finger clenched on nothing. Glass rained down like sharp rain. Bang. The second shot buried itself in the plank floor an inch from Wyatt's ear as he fell. Just a reminder. Just to underline the point. He hit the boards with a howl, clutching his shoulder, blood already soaking his sleeve, hot and bright against the faded wool of his coat. The room sucked in a breath all at once. The bartender looked from the old man's gun to his face. The tremor that had been in that hand all evening was gone. Gone like it had never been there. Wyatt lay on his back, gasping, eyes wide and bewildered. He'd felt the barrel, but hadn't seen the draw. It was like being struck by lightning clear from a blue sky. "Should have walked away," the old man said softly. His gun stayed down by his thigh, barrel angled to the floor. He thumbed the hammer back to rest and slid the revolver home in one smooth motion that did not belong to an old man. "Before we go any further, take a breath with this room. If your heart sped up watching that draw, hit that subscribe, tap the like, and tell us where you're listening from. Because what you just saw is only the first shadow of what this man really is, and what comes next might change the way you look at every quiet old-timer hunched over a drink." The old man reached into his pocket and laid a few silver coins on the bar. "For the glass," he said, "and the mess." The bartender swallowed. What's your name, sir?" For a moment, the old man seemed to consider lying. He'd done it before. Names were easy to shed if you didn't mind losing your reflection each time. But there were witnesses now. Men who'd opened a door they didn't know existed. He turned enough that the whole room could see his face. The lamplight picked out the scar running along his jaw, the faint white line over his left eyebrow, the crooked nose that had been broken long before any of them were born. "Name's Jonah Harlow," he said, though I haven't heard anyone say it out loud in a long, long time. He lifted his battered hat from the peg beside him and walked toward the door. The wood groaned under his boots like it remembered the weight. Wyatt watched him go, teeth clenched against the pane, pride bleeding out faster than the blood staining his shirt. A couple of the soldiers exchanged looks. One of them, an older man with a thick gray beard, went pale beneath his whiskers. "Jonah Harlow," he whispered. "Sweet Lord, I thought he was a story." Ray met Jonah on the porch, cold and clean. He stepped into it without flinching, letting it soak into his coat as he crossed the street to the livery. Behind him, the bar erupted in low, urgent murmurs. They talked about the war, not the one they'd fought, the one Jonah had. Some said he'd ridden with the scouts on every major campaign. Others swore he'd never worn a uniform, that he'd been something worse. A free piece on the board, hired to do the work official reports didn't write down. They said he'd taken contracts from both sides when the cause didn't matter as much as the outcome. They said generals whispered his name when plans went wrong, hoping he was on their side that week. They said a regiment could claim 100 kills in a season. Jonah Harlow had passed that in a month. No one knew where he'd gone when the cannons fell silent. One night his name was in every campfire story along the frontier. The next, it was gone like someone had cut it out of the world. Now he was sitting at their bar, putting a bullet into a younger man before he could finish saying 3. He rode out of Larkspur Junction before dawn. Rain had turned to mist crawling low over the ground, clinging to his boots, his horse's legs. The town shrank behind him, the bar's lamplight a fading ember. Ahead of him, the land rolled out in muted browns and gray, broken by scrub and fence posts and the occasional twisted tree. He didn't look back. He tried looking back once. It hadn't helped. By mid-morning, he reached open country where the grass grew taller and the sky felt wider. He stopped for a few minutes under a lone cottonwood, letting the horse drink from a narrow stream. His breath fogged in front of him. He flexed his hands slowly, watching the tremor creep back into the fingers that had been rock steady hours earlier. Adrenaline took it away. Quiet brought it back. He slept that night in the loft of a half-abandoned barn just outside Morrow Creek, listening to the wind rattle the loose boards and the distant cough of someone with a bad chest in the farmhouse. In the morning, he walked into town for breakfast. Morrow Creek was smaller than Larkspur, but the eyes were the same. Men with a 1,000-yard stare sitting on porches pretending to read newspapers. Women carrying water and grief in equal measure. He chose the boarding house on the corner. The sign out front still said rooms and meals, but one of the letters had fallen off, turning meals into mea s. It felt about right. Inside, a woman with tired eyes and a flour-streaked apron served him eggs and stale bread. He ate slowly, chewing each bite as if he was deciding whether to keep going. Halfway through his plate, the door opened behind him. Boots. Heavy. Confident. The kind of walk from a man who'd spent most of his life moving toward trouble, not away from it. Jonah didn't turn. The eggs were easier to look at. The boots stopped just behind his chair. Didn't believe it when I heard, a rough voice said. Thought somebody was spinning tales to sell drinks. But then I see you're back, and something in me remembers. A chair scraped. The man sat down across from Jonah without asking permission. Jonah set down his fork. I'm just passing through, he said. Not looking for anything. That's the difference between you and me. The stranger leaned in. He was big, with shoulders like a bull and a scar that climbed from his collar up to the corner of his eye, warping the lid. I've been looking for you for 20 years. Jonah's gaze lifted. Up close, the man's face shifted into something he recognized. Younger features stretched across more flesh. Different haircut. Same eyes. Eyes that had watched someone die. What do they call you now? Jonah asked. Name's Victor Hale, the man said. But you'd know my father. Marcus Hale. You shot him in the back of the head behind a supply tent outside Mill River in '64. The room tilted for a moment. The air thinned. Jonah reached for his glass of coffee and didn't quite make it. He saw it then. A boy in the shadow of the tent that night. A quick movement at the edge of his vision as he pulled the trigger. A shape smaller than a soldier, crouched in the dark, watching his world end. I told myself I'd put a bullet in you if I ever found you, Victor said. Swore it on the shallow grave they threw him in. You remember him? Yes, Jonas said. The word cost more than the eggs. He was going to blow up a field hospital, with wounded boys still on the cots. North and south both. My father was a soldier, Victor hissed. He followed orders. So did I, Jonah replied. He held Victor's gaze, letting the man see everything there. No bluff, no flinch. Sometimes orders meant stopping men like him before they lit a fuse. Victor's hand slid toward his gun. The room held its breath. The woman at the counter froze, fingers white around a coffee pot. Don't, Jonas said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. A weather report. The sky will rain. The river will flood. If you draw that gun, you will die. Victor felt it. He saw, in that steady, winter blue stare, the same look he remembered from the tent. The moment before the shot. The certainty. The acceptance. Not his own death, but of what needed to be done. His fingers stopped on the worn leather of his holster. I spent 2 decades chasing your shadow, Victor said, voice suddenly tired. Every rumor, every whisper, every story of an old gunman passing through. 2 decades where I could have been building something instead. A ranch, a family, anything. He looked down at his hands. Big, scarred, empty. What did it give me? He asked. Nothing, Jonas said. But you still got time to change that. He doesn't. Victor's jaw clenched. The line in his cheek jumped. Slowly, his hand came away from the gun. For a heartbeat, Jonah thought he might draw anyway, just to see if he could beat death twice. He didn't. Victor pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping. Eat your eggs, Harlow, he said. Get out of my sight. If I see you again, I don't know which way this coin lands. Jonah nodded once. Fair enough. Victor left, boots heavy on the porch. The door swung shut behind him with a dull thud. Outside, a wagon rolled past, wheels squeaking. Life went on. Jonah picked up his fork with a hand that shook a little more now. He left the eggs half-finished, dropped a few coins on the table, and stepped back into the street. He rode south that afternoon, the land flattening around him until it felt like he was traveling across a scar. The sky stretched empty. The wind tasted like dust and rusted iron. At night, he dreamed of tents and wakes and men whose names he'd never learned. By the 3rd day, he decided to angle toward the river. He knew a crossing at Hollow Bend where the current ran slower and the banks were low, good for horses. He reached it by late morning. As he led his horse down the slope toward the water, hooves sliding in the loose soil, a rider appeared on the far bank. Hat low, coat flapping. The rider kicked his horse into the river without hesitation, water splashing high around the chestnut's legs. He reached Jonah's side in under a minute, raining and hard, sending drops of cold river onto Jonah's boots. You Jonah Harlow? The rider called, breath showing white in the air. What's left of him, Jonas said. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Yellowed, creased. He held it out. Been looking for you 3 days, he said. Lady up in Garrison Falls sent this. Paid extra to make sure it reached you if you were still breathing. Said if not, to throw it in the river and be done. Jonah took the paper, heart ticking just a little faster. The handwriting on the front was neat but shaky. Jonah, nothing else. He opened it carefully, afraid it might crumble. Jonah, doctor says I've got until the first snow, maybe less. Lungs gone weak. I don't believe him, but my body does. I don't ask much from you. Never did, if you're honest. But I'd like to see you once more before I go. To talk about the things we never said and the things we did. First snow hits these hills in 3 weeks, give or take. If you can get to Garrison Falls by then, I'll be waiting in the little house by the river. If not, I'll be gone, and we'll have to leave our words to the Lord. Clara. He read it twice. He could almost hear her voice between the lines. Calm, practical, refusing to admit how scared she was without putting it in ink. The courier cleared his throat. Town's 2 days hard ride if you cut straight through the flats, he said. 3 if the weather turns. Snow's already on the peaks. Jonah folded the letter, hands steady for the first time in days. Tell her you found me, he said, and tell her I'm coming. The man nodded, turned his horse, and splashed back across the river, vanishing into the haze. Jonah swung into the saddle. Garrison Falls. 3 weeks until snow. Maybe less. After that, the roads would clog and old bones like his wouldn't handle the cold. A clock had started ticking. He kicked his horse into a trot, then a canter, leaving the crossing behind. The land between Hollow Bend and Garrison Falls had changed since he'd last ridden it. Where there'd been open fields, there were tracks now, iron rails glinting in the pale sun. Telegraph poles marched alongside, wires singing quietly with faraway voices. He passed a construction crew raising a water tower beside the line. Men in overalls swarmed over timber, hammering and shouting, building a future that didn't need men like him. He pressed on, stopping only when the horse begged for it, sleeping in shallow draws with the letter under his coat like a second heart. On the second night, snow flurries danced in the firelight before melting on his coat. He whispered a promise to the darkness anyway. "I'm coming, Clara. Don't go just yet." Whether she heard or not didn't matter. Saying it helped him ride harder. By the morning of the fourth day, the land began to slope. Distant hills rose, cloaked in pine. Smoke from a dozen chimneys smudged the sky ahead. Garrison Falls. He rode into town as the church bell struck noon. Garrison Falls had grown fat on timber and ore. The main street was lined with proper storefronts, windows full of cloth and canned goods instead of empty promises. There were more children here than in any town he'd seen in years, racing each other along the boardwalk with the wild invincibility of youth. He followed the curve of the river until the houses began to thin. The little house he remembered stood where she said it would, a modest place with peeling white paint and a low fence. A rose bush grew stubbornly by the front steps, clutching the last of its blossoms against the cold. Jonah sat on his horse for a long moment at the gate, hands tight on the reins. 3 weeks, the letter had said. Snow brushed his hat brim. He dismounted, Bones complaining, and walked up the path. The door opened before he could knock. A man in his 30s filled the frame. Dark hair, clear eyes shaped like Clara's. He took Jonah in with one slow sweep, lingering on the gun at his hip, the lines on his face. "You're late," the man said. There was no heat in it, just fact. "Roads were watching the sky same as me," Jonah replied. "You must be Daniel." The man's jaw tightened at the sound of his name in this stranger's mouth. "So you do remember us," Daniel said. "Ma said you would." He stepped aside. "She's been waiting," he added. The house smelled like soap and would smoke and something bitter steeping on the stove. Jonah followed Daniel down a narrow hallway lined with simple framed drawings, flowers, a river, a crude portrait of the house. At the end stood a door. Daniel paused with his hand on the knob. "She don't have much breath," he said, "but she's got plenty of words left. Don't waste them." He opened the door and stepped back. The room was small, lit by a single window where gray light seeped in. A fire crackled low in the hearth. In the bed against the far wall lay Clara. Time had etched itself into her skin, but it hadn't taken her eyes. They were the same soft brown he remembered, sharp enough to cut when they needed to. She smiled when she saw him. It rearranged every wrinkle on her face, turning them into lines of joy instead of fatigue. "Jonah Harlow," she said, voice thin but steady. "Took you long enough." "Had to argue with the weather," he said, moving closer, hat twisting in his hands. "You know how it is out there." "I know how you are," she said. "Come here." He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the blanket pulled up over her chest. Beneath it, her breathing rose shallow and quick. "You look terrible," she said, eyes sparkling. "You look worse," he replied. They both laughed. It broke something tight in his chest. For a while, they talked about small things. The house, the town, the way the river froze now when it never used to. Names of people they both once knew, some gone to dust, some moved back east. Then Clara shifted, her hand searching for his. He gave it to her. Her fingers were light, bird-boned, but they closed around as like the old days, like she was keeping him from floating away. "I read about you," she said quietly. "After the war. Little bits and little columns. Unnamed man intercepts raiding party. Unknown gun stops train robbery. I always knew it was you." "I tried to stop," Jonas said. "Try to put it down. But trouble kept finding me." "Trouble doesn't find you," Clara said. "My mother used to say a man is drawn to the work he's built for. You were built for hard things. For ending men who hurt others. That doesn't make you good. It doesn't make you bad. It just makes you you." He swallowed. "You left," he said. "Walked out when I thought we were just starting to build something that wasn't made of blood." She smiled sadly. "I left because we were," she said. "And I saw what it was doing to you. Tearing yourself in half, trying to be both the man who killed on command and the man who sat at this table with me and dreamed about chickens in the yard. You were going to shatter. So I broke us first. Easier that way." He shook his head. "Didn't feel easy." "It wasn't," she said. "But I got Daniel. I got a quiet life. I got mornings where the loudest sound was the kettle on the stove. And you." "I got ghosts," he said. And numbers I stopped being proud of a long time ago. You also got people who slept because you were awake, she said. Don't forget that part. The world doesn't divide itself as clean as they told us in church, Jonah. They talked until her voice gave out. She told him about Daniel's schooling, about the way he'd helped build the bridge over the river, about how he still asked about the man from the stories even after she stopped telling them. He told her about the old soldiers bragging in Larkspur, about the boy who'd almost drawn on him and ended his own life with his mouth, about Victor Hale and the tent at Mill River. I've killed more men than most wars, Jonas said finally, the words tasting like iron. And I don't know if any of it balances on the right side of the scale. Clara squeezed his hand. Stop weighing it, she whispered. You don't have enough life left for that. Do you regret some of them? Yes. Do you stand by others? Yes. Can you change any of it? No. Then here's your last order, soldier, she said. Spend whatever days you've got left doing small good things. Not big ones. Those are too easy to brag about. The quiet ones. The ones nobody writes down. And forgive yourself enough to do them instead of crawling into a hole to die. He bowed his head. And you, he asked, you forgive me? For walking out that morning with my saddle light and my pockets full of promises I didn't keep. I forgave you the day I married a man who was not you, she said, because I knew I'd chosen a life you couldn't have given me. You don't need my forgiveness, Jonah. You need your own. But if my saying it helps, she smiled, then yes, I forgive you. Snow tapped against the window, soft and insistent. 5 days later, she was gone. She died in the late afternoon, with the light slanting gold across the foot of the bed, her hand in his. Her last breath was so gentle that for a moment he thought she'd simply fallen asleep. Her last word was his name. They buried her on a hill above the river. A crowd came, neighbors, church folk, men from a mill, women who'd borrowed sugar and never returned the favor. Daniel stood at the front, shoulders set, eyes hard and dry. Jonas stood at the back, hat in his hands, like he was attending the funeral of a stranger. Nobody asked who he was. When the preacher finished speaking, Jonah turned and walked away before anyone could try. He left Garrison Falls the next morning with a pack of food, a few dollars Daniel shoved into his hand without looking him in the eye, and the memory of Clara's fingers around his. The burden he carried hadn't vanished, but had shifted. He no longer wore it like a noose. He wore it like a coat he couldn't take off, but could at least button differently. He drifted through small towns with one street and big skies, through camps where men dug in the earth for or that might make someone else rich, through lonely farmsteads where a fence was all that stood between a family and the wild. In each place, he did small things. He fixed a broken wagon wheel for a woman whose husband had died in the war, then disappeared before she could press payment into his hands. He sat with a young veteran outside a tent where the man shook and sobbed at noises only he could hear, saying nothing, just sharing the silence until the trembling eased. He stepped between a drunk and the boy he was hitting behind the saloon in Dry Willow, taking the punch himself and returning nothing but a stare that sent the man stumbling backward, suddenly sober. No newspapers wrote about those nights. No one told stories. He preferred it that way. He found himself, one autumn, in a place called Mesa Hollow. It wasn't on any map he'd ever seen, just a cluster of buildings where the trail met a narrow canyon. There was a jail the size of a shed, a store, a livery, and a bar pretending to be a hotel. The town had a sheriff too young for the mustache he was trying to grow. Jonas saw him standing in the middle of the street one afternoon, hand hovering near his gun, facing down 6 men on horseback. The men wore a mismatch of uniforms and civilian coats, bits of old insignia pinned crooked. Their saddles carried rolled flags, not folded solemn, but knotted like trophies. At their head rode Wyatt Briggs. His arm rested in a sling now, the shoulder higher than the other, pulled tight by scar tissue. But the swagger was still there, riding higher than his horse. Mesa Hollow's people watched from porches and windows. Mothers dragged children behind shutters. The air tasted like dust and fear. You already bled this town last month, the young sheriff called, voice steady but just. 3 wagons of cattle. 2 days' worth of food. You ain't taking more. Wyatt laughed. You think this badge makes you tall, boy, he said. You know how many charges I rode at? How many bullets I've walked through? This place pays me for keeping worse men away. You're just too green to see it. He reached down and grabbed the old man, kneeling beside him by the hair, hauling his head up so everyone could see the blood trickling from his nose. Jonah recognized the man. He'd fixed that same man's fence 2 days ago. Name was Burke. He had a granddaughter who followed him everywhere like a shadow. She didn't have enough coin, Wyatt said, jerking the man's head. So I told her she could pay in kind. He objected. See the problem? We're working that out between gentlemen here. The sheriff's jaw clenched. Let him go, he said. Wyatt smiled. I will, he said. At dawn, he pushed Burke to the ground. 2 of his men dragged the older man toward the half-built gallows at the edge of town, laughter ugly in their mouths. At sunrise, we hang one of yours, Wyatt called. Unless this town doubles last month's payment. Cattle, food, whatever you've got. You've got 1 night to decide what a man's life is worth. There it was. A new countdown. Jonah watched from the shade beside the livery, hat low. He could feel the town's heart hammering in the air. The sheriff took a step forward, hand finally closing around his gun. One of Wyatt's men pointed a rifle at his chest. Careful, Wyatt said. You draw now. It's over before that mustache catches up, and nobody gets a chance to be noble. The young lawman stopped. Wyatt turned his horse and rode away, his men trailing behind him like a dark comet. The threat hung in the dust they left behind. Dawn, rope, sacrifice. That night, the town gathered in the bar. Voices rose. Hands pounded tables. Arguments tangled like barbed wire. Jonah sat in the corner, listening. Some said they should pay. Others said they had nothing left. A few suggested turning Burke over, letting 1 man die to save the rest. Burke's granddaughter sat on a step outside, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes huge. The sheriff stood in the center of the room, staring at the floor, shoulders bowed under a weight bigger than the star on his chest. We can't fight them, someone shouted. They've got numbers. They've got rifles. We can't just let them string Burke up like a dog, someone else snapped. We could run, a third voice said. And go where? Another shot back. They'll just bleed the next place too. Jonah rose. The room quieted as if someone had thrown a blanket over it. He walked to the sheriff and looked him in the eye. How many men you got that can shoot straight? Jonah asked. 4, counting me, the sheriff said. 6 if you count those who can hold a gun without dropping it. How many houses on the east side of town? Jonah asked. 7, the sheriff said, confused. Why? Jonah nodded. Because that's where they'll come through, he said. Easier than riding the main street with every rifle pointed their way. They're not brave. They're efficient. He turned to the room. You all want this to stop, he asked. Silence answered him. Heads nodded. Eyes turned away from fear and towards something sharper. Then tomorrow, before dawn, you put your best shooters on those roofs there and there. He pointed. You leave the street empty. You let them think you ran. And you? The sheriff asked. I'll be in the street, Jonas said, talking to Briggs. The sheriff frowned. You know him. Better than he knows me, Jonas said. He spent the night loading rounds, cleaning his gun, checking his boots. He slept for an hour with his back against the wall, hat over his eyes. When he woke, the sky was still black, the air holding its breath before dawn. He walked Burke's granddaughter back to her grandfather, hugging her once before sending her to the far edge of town with the other women and children. Dawn came slow, gray first, then pale blue. The east side of town seemed to glow as the sun crawled up, painting the canyon walls in soft fire. Hoofbeats echoed. Wyatt and his men rode in from the east, just like Jonas said they would. They saw the empty street and laughed. Looks like they ran, one of them said. Wyatt didn't laugh. His eyes scanned the buildings. He'd seen empty streets before. Sometimes they were safe. Sometimes they weren't. Bring him out anyway, he said. They dragged Burke onto the half-finished gallows, rope already looped. The old man's face was bruised, but his chin was high. Jonas stepped out from between 2 buildings into the center of the street. He felt the roofs above him, the eyes, the rifles. Wyatt saw him. For a moment, confusion flickered. Then anger flooded in. You, he said. The ghost of Larkspur. Arm treating you all right? Jonah asked. I was aiming to keep it, Wyatt's hand twitched near his gun. You shot me in front of half that town, he said. Made me look weak. Lost contracts because of you. Men stopped listening. And now you make them bleed towns instead, Jonas said. How many lives you hanging around your neck these days, Briggs? More or less than the war gave you. Wyatt sneered. Still less than you from what I hear, he said. But I'm catching up. He nodded at Burke. This ain't about you, old man, he said. Step aside. You get to ride off again. Live to haunt another bar. Jonah shook his head. Can't do that, he said. Lady I trusted told me to spend what's left of me on small good things. This feels like one of them. Then you die with him, Wyatt said. His men shifted, hands tightening on reins, fingers brushing triggers. On the roofs, Mesa Hollow's few shooters lay prone, breath slow, eyes squinting down sights. The sheriff lay belly down behind a chimney, heart pounding so hard he swore the men below could hear it. Jonah reached up and unhooked his coat, letting it fall open, letting them see the gun, the stance, the history. You remember how this goes? He asked Wyatt. You count fast, draw faster, miss entirely. The men on horseback laughed, but not as freely as before. I ain't the green fool you met in Larkspur, Wyatt said. I've had years to think about that morning. I practiced with my left hand. He shifted his stance, drawing his left arm free of the sling. The shoulder moved stiffly, but his fingers flexed sure around the pistol. You ready to find out who the war made faster? He asked. Jonah thought about Clara, about Victor Hale, about the boys sobbing outside the tent, about Bert's granddaughter, watching the canyon from the edge of town. No, he said, but I'm here anyway. Wyatt grinned, teeth white in the dawn. On 3 then, he said, for old time's sake. On 1, Jonah said. It took Wyatt half a heartbeat too long to understand. By the time he did, Jonah had already moved. Bang! Wyatt's left hand exploded in pain, gun spinning away, fingers numb. His shot went wild, slamming into the dirt at Jonah's feet. Bang! Bang! 2 of the riders on the left toppled from their saddles, chests exploding in red mist. Mesa Hollow shooters had found their marks. Now, the sheriff shouted from the roof. Rifles cracked. The canyon filled with sound. Horses screamed. Men cursed. Bullets tore splinters from rails and ripped through coats. Jonah moved like a man half his age, crossing the space between him and Wyatt in long, sure strides, shooting as he walked. Bang! A man's leg shattered, horse rearing and crashing down. Bang! Another rifle went quiet as its owner pitched backward. Wyatt grabbed for his reins, trying to pull his horse away. Jonah reached him. He grabbed Wyatt by the front of his coat and yanked him from the saddle with surprising strength. They hit the ground together, Wyatt's breath punching out of him. Jonah rolled, gun up, barrel pressed against Wyatt's throat. The town went silent again, except for the moans of wounded men and the ragged breathing of those still alive. Above, rifles aimed down, waiting. End it, someone whispered. Wyatt stared up at Jonah, eyes wide, seeing for the first time not an old man at a bar, not a mistake from Larkspur, but the sum of every contract, every battlefield, every night raid. How many? Wyatt rasped. How many men you put down? Jonah thought of numbers. He let them go. Enough, he said. He cocked the hammer. Wyatt swallowed. You kill me, he said, voice cracking. My men'll. Your men are already deciding whether they're ready to die for you, Jonah said. Look around. Wyatt glanced sideways. The men still in their saddles were backing their horses away. Slowly, carefully, not wanting to draw a bullet, not wanting to ride forward either. Loyalty had died in the dust with the first volley. Jonah saw the realization hit Wyatt. The pride, the isolation, the knowledge that when it came down to it, he was just another loudmouth who'd mistaken fear for respect. You gonna hang Burke? Jonah asked. If I let you walk out of this? No, Wyatt whispered. You gonna ride out of this valley and not come back? Yes. You gonna keep bleeding towns that can't push back? Wyatt hesitated. Jonah pressed the barrel harder into his throat. No, Wyatt croaked. No, I'll stop. Jonah believed him. Not because Wyatt had suddenly become a better man, but because something in his face had broken that wouldn't heal right again. He lowered the gun. You ride north, he said. You tell any man you meet who thinks he's hard because he's killed in a war that there's always someone quieter with a longer shadow. You tell him about today, about how fast you thought you were, and how wrong you were. And if I hear your name again in a bad way, I'll finish what I started in Larkspur. Wyatt nodded so fast it looked like he might snap his own neck. Jonah stood. Untie him, he called, nodding at Burke. Two men rushed to cut the rope from around the old man's neck. Wyatt scrambled to his feet, cradling his ruined hand, and staggered to his horse. He mounted clumsily, one-handed, and turned north without looking back. His remaining men followed. It wasn't a clean victory. 2 townsfolk lay dead. 3 more groaned on the ground, bleeding from arms, legs, shoulders. But Burke lived. The gallows stood empty in the sunrise. The sheriff walked up to Jonah, boots crunching on spent shells. I don't know who you are, he said, voice hoarse. But thank you. Jonah looked at him. He saw himself younger. More angles. Less weight. The same stubborn streak. It's your town, Jonah said. Next time, try and fix it before men like me have to show up. The sheriff flushed. I'll do better, he said. I hope you do, Jonah replied. He left Mesa Hollow that afternoon. Years peeled away like old posters from a wall. His hair thinned more. His hands shook in the mornings, no matter how he held them. His heart skipped beats like it was tired of the rhythm. In a little nameless settlement at the edge of a dying river, he found a cabin half fallen into itself. He fixed the roof with slow care, repaired the door, mended the windows, bought a rocking chair from a man whose wife wanted a newer one. The locals called him Old Joe because he didn't offer a full name and they didn't push. He fixed hinges, sharpened tools, watched children while their parents hauled water. He sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun turn the desert into a band of gold and rust. It might have ended there, quietly, without echoes. One evening, as the sky burned orange, a rider came down the dusty track toward the cabin. Jonah shaded his eyes. The man on the horse dismounted stiffly, favoring his left leg. He had a scar at his shoulder that pulled his coat crooked. His face was older, filled out, but the eyes were the same sharp trouble from Larkspur Junction. Wyatt Briggs took off his hat and held it in front of him. I've been looking for you, he said. Jonah's hand twitched toward his gun out of habit. Wyatt raised his free hand, palm out. Not for that, he said. For this. He nodded at the spare chair on the porch. May I? Jonah thought about sending him away. Then he thought about Clara giving orders from bed. He nodded. Wyatt sat slowly, wincing as his leg bent. I still feel that bullet on cold mornings, he said, almost conversational. The one from Larkspur. Shoulder aches like the devil. And this, he held up his left hand. 2 fingers were gone, the others stiff. This don't close right anymore. Jonah waited. Wyatt looked out over the sand, the brush, the low hills. After Mesa Hollow, he said, I rode north like you said. Spent a lot of nights thinking about the way your gun fell on my throat. About how close my feet were to swinging from that gallows myself. About how fast I'd been counting bodies like they were coins. He swallowed. I never thanked you, he said, for not pulling that trigger. You're thanking me for not killing you. Jonah said. Wyatt nodded. If you'd ended me on that street, that would have been the end of the story, he said. Loudmouth war veteran gets what's coming. Folks go home satisfied. Instead, I got to build something I never thought I'd have. He smiled, small and real. I run a freight line now, he said. 3 wagons, regular route. Hard work, little profit, no stolen cattle. Got a wife who doesn't flinch when I come through the door. 2 boys who think the war was a story their old man tells, not a ghost in the house. He took a breath. And I got your voice in my head every time I want to puff my chest and brag about the bad things I've done, he said. You cut that part out of me with that bullet. He turned to Jonah. So, thank you, he said simply. You damn near killed me, and it saved my life. Jonah felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was still tight. He'd spent years stacking his deeds in 2 columns, good and bad, always finding the second heavier. He hadn't left room for the strange math where one violent act planted a seed of change that grew long after the bruise faded. You did that yourself, Jonah said quietly. I just gave you the moment. Then maybe we did it together, Wyatt said. He pushed himself to his feet. I won't take more of your time. Just needed you to hear it before time takes it anyway. He put his hat back on. If you ever come through Redwater, he added, there's a warm meal on my table. Jonah nodded. I'll keep that in mind. Wyatt smiled, tipped the brim, and rode away, a small dust cloud trailing behind him like the end of a sentence. The next morning, Jonah woke before dawn, as always. His heart stumbled in his chest, then raced to catch up. It did that more often now. This time, it didn't quite find the old rhythm again. He sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slow, waiting for the pounding to even out. It didn't. He knew what that meant. Fear never crossed his face. Fear was for men with a long road ahead. His trail had been getting shorter for years. He stood, pulled on his coat, and walked out to the porch. The horizon was a thin line of purple turning blue. The first edge of the sun peered over the hills, spilling light across the sand, turning every rough stone briefly beautiful. He sat in the rocking chair and folded his hands in his lap. He thought about scrub fires and night raids, about Clara's hand in his, about the look on Burke's granddaughter's face when the rope came off her grandfather's neck, about Victor Hale walking out of the boarding house instead of drawing, about Wyatt Briggs with his missing fingers and his freight line and his boys. He let the numbers go. He watched the desert wake. When they found him 3 days later, he was still in the chair, eyes half closed, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. The wind had lifted dust onto his boots. A small lizard basked on the railing, unbothered by his stillness. He'd left a small pouch of coins on the table inside with a note. For the trouble. No name on the marker. They've buried him on a slight rise overlooking the dry riverbed. A simple mound of earth. No stone. No dates. But names have a way of refusing to stay underground. The sheriff from Mesa Hollow told the story of the dawn standoff to his replacement. Daniel in Garrison Falls told his children about the man who sat by their grandmother's bed and made her laugh with lines that were almost jokes. Burke's granddaughter grew up, and, when her own children asked why she never feared men who shouted, told them about the old stranger who stared down 6 guns so her grandfather could see another morning. Wyatt Briggs, who lived longer than he'd ever expected, told his sons around the fire about a quiet man who had ended more lives than any regiment, then walked away from killing when he finally learned what those numbers meant. In bars and bunkhouses and camps all along the rail lines, men started using Jonah Harlow as a warning, not a boast. Careful, they'd say to young bucks counting kills over beer. A war don't make you the deadliest man in the room. Sometimes it just makes you loud. The ones you need to worry about are the old men who don't talk about numbers at all. So if you ever find yourself in a bar, listening to someone brag about how many they've put in the ground, remember the quiet ones in the corners. Remember the towns that nearly lost everything because nobody stood up until an old hand did. And if this story kept you riding all the way to the end, tip your hat with a like, drop where you're listening from the comments, and think twice before you judge any weathered stranger by the shake in his hands instead of the miles on his soul.